This is kind of a weird lecture because this is a geography class and we're going to do history. Ordinarily, I wouldn't even do this lecture in here, but last year we didn't get to have this lecture in a history class because we went to, we disappeared for a few months.
We did.
So I kind of lost this. And I think it's important to get an idea because in our world, Russia is going to be something super important to us, okay? So we're going to look today at Russia, land of the Czars. We're going to trace it from its very beginning all the way up to a guy named Peter the Great. This is also going to answer some questions on that quiz is when y'all looked at it and went, we haven't gone over this. Well,
yeah.
Now we are, okay? So when we talk about Russia, y'all seen this map already. What's this massive country, the largest country in the world, right?
Yes.
What continents are it on? Is it on?
Europe and Asia.
Europe and Asia. What divides them?
Great Divide.
No. They're right here. You remember what this is?
The mountains.
The Ural Mountains.
Yeah.
The Ural Mountains is what divides them, right? So Russia wasn't always that big. We go back to the ancient days, 972. Russia was just this kind of dark area right here along the Black Sea. Centered on one city, the city of Kiev. That's not even in Russia today, it's in Ukraine, okay? But that was Russia back at the time period that we're talking about, back in 972. It was a part that had been part of the Byzantine Empire. And it was greatly influenced by the Byzantines. It had a Byzantine-style Christianity. Now, again, we didn't get into that a lot last year because we disappeared for months on end. So we didn't get to talk about the great schism in the church. But in the Christian church, there used to just be one church, right? So there was the Catholic Church, right? Or the Christian church. Catholic really just means wise. Well, they broke up, they ended up splitting because they had some issues over, we call it the iconoclasm, over whether or not it's okay to use icons. What's an icon? Anybody know?
This goblet here.
It's a symbol for God. Okay, it's a symbol like a picture. Okay? And if you read the Bible literally, it says, thou shalt have no false idols, thou shalt have no icons. Well, one group of the church said that means you can't have pictures. And another group went, our people are stupid and can't read, we'd like to have pictures. So this church ended up splitting, and you ended up with the Roman Catholic Church in Rome and the Eastern Orthodox Church in Greece. The Pope was in charge of this one and the Archbishop was in charge of this one, okay? And there's two rival Christian churches. These guys, at this point, were Eastern Orthodox. A little later on, we're going to see they're going to split again. So they're going to be greatly influenced by this, which is the Byzantine Empire, okay? So, geographically, we kind of talked about this. Kind of keep in your mind, what is this part of Russia? The Russia we're talking about there is mostly a steppe, and we used that word yesterday. It's large, grassy, nearly treeless plain. The Ural Mountains are right here that kind of divides Europe from Asia. So different people on one side from the other. There's a lot of big rivers in this area. The Black Sea is the most important spot. This is going to be an agricultural area, okay? Now, what's going to happen is it's going to be overran by a group of people we call the Slavs or the Vikings, okay? What countries are Slavic today? Anybody know of any? You probably do without realizing it. You ever heard of a country called Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia? Both of those have Slav in them. Slavs are these people, they're right on the borders of Europe. They're Asian. So on our big map here, if you're looking at it, the Slavs are in these regions right here, right on the border, okay? Right kind of by the Ural Mountains. And these people ended up kind of coming in and mixing with the ethnic Europeans that were there. The Vikings from Scandinavia in the 800s started coming in originally as traders, sailing up those rivers. Remember, the Vikings were the greatest sailors in the world. And when they came, they brought their culture. So you end up with this different type of culture mixing. All this is coming together in this area. The most important places was Novgorod in the north and Kiev in the south. These two, we're going to call them cities. We wouldn't call them cities today. Okay? They're large settlements, okay? They're trade centers. The problem Russia has, and again, at this time period we're talking about this. This is the Russia we're talking about, okay? Look at the rest of Russia. Just geography. Why do you think these people are going to have a problem?
Mountain, the cold.
This is Siberia. It's a lowland. This is a desert, a high desert, so it's an Arctic desert. All this area over here is not good farmland. People are not going to be well. This area of Russia, incredibly rich in farmland. So these people have what all of these people over here are going to want. So this is like a crossroad. You're going to have Vikings coming from up here down, wanting to take over. You're going to have Asiatic people coming from this way wanting to take over. You're going to have groups of people coming from the south wanting to take, because this land is so rich. Okay? It's kind of a victim of its own luck when it comes to geography. Remember we use that word share nose and soil, that rich black soil, that's in this region. So Russia we're talking about is right here in the middle of it, okay? So this guy, how did the Vikings come to stay? Because we often think of Russians as Europeans. We talked about the other day, when I think of a Russian, I don't think of the guys in Asia, I think of the European looking. Well, how they became that is from these guys. Novgorod was a trade city. In the 860s, Novgorod asked one of these Viking war chiefs to defend them. They were being attacked, and they asked this guy, Rurik. They said, will you come and defend us? So he did. He brought his soldiers in, he defended it, and he conquered everybody around him. What's that going to do?
Novgorod better.
It makes Novgorod more powerful, but it also means that when everybody else is gone, there is one power left. The Vikings. They came in as the guys to defend them, as the heroes, but when it was over, they looked around and went, who's going to stop us if we just take it? No, they took it over. Rurik became the leader of this area. Mostly the city of Kiev, but the whole area becomes dominated by these descendants of the Vikings. The Slavs called these Vikings the Rus. That was their nickname, was the Rus. In Slavic, that just means Viking. But they came, they stayed, and they stayed so long that they started calling the land of the Rus. Russia, Russia, okay? So literally, Russia, the name Russia means land of Vikings now, okay?
I can see it.
So Kiev becomes the capital of Russia, and for a while, these little towns all around it, they remain what we call semi-independent. They were allowed to have their own government and do their own thing, but they had to pay a tribute to Kiev. They had to pay a tax. It's kind of like when the mafia comes to town and says, hey, I'll let you run your business, but you got to give me protection money, like you see in the movies.
Hey, bro.
Hurry up, you're slow.
This is why you have your Amber.
Is there a Nazi meeting that you got to get to?
No, they're going stolen.
By the way, did y'all get the weird Amber Alert Friday?
Yes.
No, I turned mine off.
Somebody on Friday, they were testing the Amber Alert system and they were trying to do it inside and not have it go out, and it went out. An Amber Alert went out all over the state of Texas on Friday for Chucky from the movies.
I didn't even see it.
Kind of weird.
I bet everybody started freaking
I
out.
was
Yeah.
sure that was a fake.
Well, it was supposed to be just a training exercise, and they were supposed to send it off and it was only supposed to reach the emergency coordinators as a training exercise, but it went out to everybody instead. Yeah, happens sometimes, you know.
Mine went up.
The same thing happened a few years ago when they were training the nuclear warning system in Hawaii and accidentally notified all the people in Hawaii that nuclear weapons were coming. Stuff happens sometimes. All right, so these guys get to stay independent as long as they pay a tribute. So they're paying taxes to Kiev. So you're kind of seeing the development of the country, okay? Yes, it's not really a country yet, but you can see the beginnings of it. Here's a picture of Novgorod. This is what you think of as Russian architecture?
No.
No.
It looks like it came straight from Aladdin.
It does. It looks very Asiatic, right? Very or Middle Eastern. Russian architecture has these, we call them onion tops.
Walls.
And you see why? It looks like an onion upside down almost.
Looks like
This is a pretty
fat.
common thing that you'll see in Russian architecture.
Fat pillars.
That comes from that Asiatic, and you'll see this a lot in these buildings. When you see the Kremlin, you'll see it even bigger. Eastern Orthodox churches look like this a lot still today. So, what are these cities going to have? Each city's going to have their own prince. Now, again, the prince is paying a tax. But the prince is not like a king. He doesn't have all the power. He gets to make decisions with the advice of a council. And these councils are called boyars, the Council of Boyars. It's kind of similar to like our Senate. It's these people that are well born. In this case, it'd be like a royal class, okay? These nobles. They would have town meetings, we call them vex, where the heads of household from all the houses would come, and they would discuss what goes on. They would advise the boyars would advise the prince would act. Okay? So it's an interesting kind of government. It's very limited, but keep these council of boyars in mind. Because as long as you have a strong prince, these guys are just giving advice.
If you have a dumb prince.
If you have a weak prince, then these guys exercise all the power, and they're not going to want to give it up later. Okay? So there's going to be a power struggle because of this. This is Yaroslav the Wise, or Yaroslav the First. Yaroslav rules from 1019 to 1054. Probably these numbers are really soft. You know, a lot of it's us guessing and things. But what he's most famous for is he wrote a book, or he wrote a series of laws called the Pravda Russia, the laws of Russia. Okay, that's what this word means. It's the law of the journals. It's the name of, it's today's name of the most important newspaper in Russia is the Pravda. Okay, the Pravda Russia is kind of their first laws, and it applied to everybody. So that's a big step forward. This hat is common to boyars. You'll see this a lot. So when you see this, this is a very Russian look. Okay.
It kind of looks like a cross between a bucket hat and a bowler hat.
It's kind of like a beanie with fur around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a painting of the boyars, the Russian boyars, and they're advising a prince here. Now, when you look at this, who looks like they have the power?
The ones in the chair.
He's clearly the prince, the guy in authority. But when I'm looking around, it looks to me like he's getting lectured by this guy. These guys seem to be, all, if not equals, very close to him. Okay? And this is what's going on in Russia. They've got this problem with it. So, let's talk about how Russia became officially a Christian country. So Vladimir the First, what a great name, Vladimir the First. He wants his country to have a powerful religion. So he asks the great religions of the world to all send missionaries to explain to him exactly what their religion can do. And the Catholics, these guys sent a missionary. The Jews sent a missionary. The Muslims sent a missionary. They all told him. And he looked at it. And he looked at Islam and he said, Islam, y'all can't drink. No. If your God is so weak he can't handle alcohol, I don't want that God. And Judaism, your God has got a limited diet. You can't eat pork. And if your God can't, he's a weak God. And they looked at Catholicism and they went, your leader is he's a prince of a foreign country, of Italy. I'm not going to have my people following the orders of a prince of another nation. That seems dumb. So he ends up saying, we're going to be Eastern Orthodox. We're going to go with this version of Christianity. Eventually this is going to become Russian Orthodox. So that becomes the official religion, not because of some great belief, but because it was convenient and it seemed like a strong religion for his people. And he wanted his nation to be strong. By the way, this guy, Vladimir, is a patron saint in the Russian Orthodox Church. He's considered a saint now. Again, the agriculture is the most important thing about this area. The taiga is in here. What's the taiga? Anybody remember that one?
Frozen forest.
There you go. Coniferous forest, frozen, right? There are social classes. You have your pyramid, you have the royalty at the top, your artisans and merchants, that's your skilled laborers, your clergy, that's your priests, and then your peasants. Your peasants are by far the biggest.
Priests are below.
Priests are below your businessmen, yeah. These guys would kind of be almost nobility. And then you got your priests, which usually come from the lower middle class. So religion is not as big of a deal here as it is in other places, at least not at this point. So what's going to happen? Well, as these Vikings kind of lose their identity as Vikings and become Russians, they're not as tough as they used to be. You know, over generations you can lose that, right? So Kiev declines in power after 1054. And the princes start fighting each other. It kind of breaks out into civil war. And they're all fighting, trying to see who's going to emerge as the grand prince, as the most important guy. Well, in comes the Mongols, led by a guy named Genghis Khan. The Mongols are going to come from Mongolia, at least indirectly. This is Mongolia, this purple area here, okay? So these Asiatic warriors that were the greatest horsemen in the world come rushing across the steppes, and they invade into this area. By 1240, the Mongols control Russia, and they're going to control it for well over 100 years, okay? Just like we saw with the Vikings, they're going to be okay. They don't want to manage this. They want the money. So they're okay with these princes going ahead and exercising the local power, as long as they pay their taxes. And taxes were very, very high. So you either paid the Mongols, or they came in and burned your crops and your towns to the ground. And it worked for a while, okay? Pretty effective. Why else were they effective? This is kind of an important one. The Mongols did not impose their culture. They did not expect you to become Mongolian. You could keep your religion, you could keep your language. They did not care about this. What did they care about?
Money.
Money. Pay me my money, right? They did improve infrastructure. They improved the roads and stuff. So that was appreciated. Of course, it was largely so they could get their war machines down there, if they were doing that. They built a taxation model that's still being used in Russia today. Built a communication model that's still being used in Russia today. It was super effective, okay? And then this guy rises up, Ivan the First. Ivan. Ivan decides to cooperate with the Mongols. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll make your life easier. I'll collect the taxes from everybody in Russia, and I'll just pay you. You don't have to send your people down here anymore. It'll be cheaper for you. The Mongols say, fine, that's a good idea. It's good for everybody, right? So they named him Grand Prince. He's the most important of the princes in the Rus. And he's in a place called Muscovy, which is Moscow today. And he collects the taxes. And every year he sends them off. And everything's fine. He even moves the leader of the church to Moscow. By this point, the church is broken again. And this church has split off. And you've still got Eastern Orthodox. It's called Greek Orthodox now. But you have Russian Orthodox. We're in the Russian part now. And the Russian Orthodox Church moved its leader to Moscow. If you were in a world history class, it's kind of like we had 3 popes now. We had a leader of the Christian church in Italy that claimed to lead all Christians. You had a leader in Greece that claimed to lead all Christians. And now you have a leader in Moscow that claims to lead all Christians. In fact, they all excommunicated each other at one point, okay? So he's done something. He's consolidated political power, but he's also consolidated religious power. And when you put those two together, you become very dangerous, okay? And one day, he just stopped sending the taxes to the Mongols. And when they showed up, he had an army because he had united all the Russian people. We're not doing this anymore. Defeats the Mongols left, and he united this whole area under him. But guess what? What didn't change?
The taxes.
He still collected the taxes. Everybody still had to pay him. Now they're just paying a Russian, they're not paying a Mongol anymore, okay? Anybody ever heard of this guy, Ivan III? He's the most interesting of the monarchs. He's gonna come around a little later on. Ivan III has a couple of different nicknames, or monocrats. They call him Ivan the Great, or Ivan the Awesome. But he preferred to be called Ivan the Terrible. Now, y'all listen to this going, why would somebody want to be called the Terrible? Because terrible means bad, right? Terrible didn't used to mean bad. Terrible's root word is terror.
He's scared of.
Ivan the Terrible, he liked that because I am Ivan that you should all be scared of. And that's how he ruled, was through pure fear. This guy was probably crazy. He's the guy that finally completely boots out the Mongols in 1480. Defeats them, unites it all, makes himself, he takes the first title of Czar. It's actually his grandson, Ivan IV. He becomes ruler at 3 years old. 3 years old! He becomes ruler. Guess who's going to rule instead? You think at 3 years old you're really going to dominate? What do we call that group of people?
The boyars.
The boyars. So the council of boyars are going to control him. Fine, you're the czar, but sit down, boy, we're going to do this. And he has to sit and watch his empire being robbed by these boyars, this noble class, until he's 17. Not much older than you guys. Probably the same age as some of you guys. And suddenly, he says, I've had enough. Y'all been stealing from me for too long. He declares himself not only the leader of Russia, but he says, I'm the heir to the Roman Empire and the heir to the Byzantine Empire, and he takes the title of Czar, which is just Russian for Caesar, okay? He's calling himself Caesar now, and to show how powerful he is, at a dinner, when the boyars are there one time, he accuses one of the boyars' sons of plotting against him. There's no evidence that it was happening, but he accuses this boyar's son of plotting against him. And at the dinner table, he orders his dogs to attack, and his dogs rip this boyar's son apart. What's the message he's just sent?
He's in power now.
I'm in power. If you mess with me, this is what will happen. And he begins a purge. He starts slaughtering all of the boyars that were against him. This guy extends the Russian borders out, becomes massive underneath him. He kills his own family members. There's all kinds of stuff. There's a great movie called Land of the Czars. They talk about this. But he's literally crazy. He ends up getting married, and that kind of calms his bloodlust down, and everything's fine for a few years, about 10, 15 years. He becomes a very loving czar, and the people liked him, and he treated them well. And then his wife died. Probably just died, but he's going to blame the boyars and believe that she was poisoned. And he's going to create a secret service of these men in black robes that rode their horses and went out and just slaughtered people in the name of the Tsar. It's the earliest version of what will eventually become the secret service of Russia, okay? But they were these warlords that rode with the death head, and they just killed everything. Very violent person.
Kind of reminds me of the KKK.
Sort of. This is the, I told you we would see the Kremlin, the building that's very Russian. This is that building. Isn't this phenomenal looking? It almost looks unreal, which is something you see at Disneyland, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we gotta find some way to justify this church, this Russian Orthodox Church, okay? So they kind of invent a story. They say, oh no, the Russian Orthodox Church isn't new. We didn't just create it here. The Russian Orthodox Church was the original church. These are the fake churches. Andrew, one of the disciples, brought Christianity to Rome in the 1st century. The argument was, we were Christian before these guys were. Now, there's no evidence that was true, but he ends up at least passing that story off. And Russia becomes a very, very Christian nation. I'm going to skip some of this. This is a picture of Orthodox Christianity. If you go to an Orthodox church, this is what they look like, still today. I've got a good friend that's Russian Orthodox, goes to a church in Tyler. I went with her one time, and this is what you see. This is what the churches look like. This is the inside. You can see it's got a lot of Byzantine influences. Mosaics. Looks very much like what we saw in the Byzantine Empire. The Russian alphabet is also influenced by the Byzantine alphabet. If you ever see Russian, this is kind of it in comparison with English. These are Russian letters over here on the left. Kind of get some kind of a feel. So if you were to spell your name, you might have some difficulty. You'll see some letters are missing. There's no C. Okay? Why is there no C? Well, because for the hard C, the K, you use the K. For the soft C, you use the S. Okay?
Where's the J? I don't see a J.
G. Oh, a J?
Yeah, J.
They would probably use a G. They'd probably use that for a J. So, it's an interesting idea. If you were trying to spell your name, it would be an interesting idea. So Russia's going to expand. This is just kind of a map for you to see what the Mongol chains look like as Genghis Khan came through here. That's a massive rush. Really, this guy also conquered China. The Mongols, the Mongol horde was phenomenal. Picture of Ivan the Great. This is whenever he broke with the Khan. 1480, tore up the letter and kicked him out. We're going to skip some of this. Anybody ever hear the Romanovs? What time is it? When Ivan's family dies out, there's no heir. So they start looking, and they find this distant relative, Michael Romanoff, and they make him king. It would really be Mikhail Romanoff. But Mikhail is named Tsar of Russia, and he's going to found the Romanov dynasty. That dynasty starts in 1613, and it's going to be the longest serving dynasty in the history of the world. They're going to rule Russia until 1917. His family is. Okay? Till World War I. Massive when you think about it. This is the official headdress, the crown of the Russian Tsar. You can still see that today. This becomes the family crest, the symbol of Russia, the Romanovs. The war eagle. So there's always going to be this problem in Russia where Russia wants a czar until the czar becomes very, very powerful and they want to weaken him. You get this pendulum where sometimes this group of the middle class and these church people are going to be dominating. You'll come over here, sometimes the warriors are going to be dominating. You're always going back and forth between who is in power. But Russia never really stabilizes, okay? It's always right on the verge of war and falling apart. And then this guy came around, Peter the Great, Peter Romanoff. Peter was another one of those ones that came to power as a boy. He had a twin brother, and they come to power while they're very young as Czars. But his brother, we think today, was probably mentally unstable. Not all thereof. His older sister ran things while they were little. In fact, there's a picture, I don't have it up there, I'll see if I can find it for you at some point. When they were little, the throne they had a double throne that the two boys would sit in, and behind it is another seat, and there was a door that opened that they believed that the sister would sit behind the throne and whisper into their ears what to say. Peter's going to get tired of his sister, and eventually he's going to imprison her in a nunnery, make her become a nun and imprison her. His brother dies kind of mysteriously, and Peter becomes the sole regent, the sole czar of Russia. Peter was the typical spoiled rich kid growing up. You know how y'all got like, you guys at least got like toy soldiers and stuff to play with when you were a kid? He got real soldiers to play with. They gave him like an army of slaves to play with real cannons and stuff. And he went out and learned to play war, shooting like wooden cannonballs at people. People were dying in his play war. That's kind of how he grew up. But he's an interesting guy. He's a real smart guy. And before he really exercises complete power, he is the czar, but he takes a leave of absence. He says Russia needs to modernize. He looks westward to Europe and says, we should be like them. Europe was rich, Russia was poor. So we want to be like them. So he took a bunch of friends and they made a trip around Europe, and they visited all of the capital cities and stuff. But he pretended not to be the czar. He went in disguise, and he actually, he went to some countries and he worked as a shipwright building ships and learned how to do it. When he comes back to Russia, he brings all those skills with him, and he turns Russia into a naval power. He just went and learned how to do this. He made his men refer to him as Carpenter Peter instead of Czar Peter at the time period, because he wanted that experience. That having been said, he still acted a lot like an idiot. When he was in England, he went to meet the Queen of England, and she had gotten one of her friends to give him their house to stay in while they were there. And by the time they left, they had destroyed the house. They with their guns shot they were using the paintings as target practice in the house. They'd blown the door off with a cannon. It was like letting frat boys loose in your house. But Peter is going to come to power in 1682, and he's going to be the greatest ruler that they ever had.
Why did he do that to his sister?
Because she was not willing to turn. He was the legal leader, but she was not letting power go. She'd been controlling things while he was a minor. So he said, fine, I'll just lock you up. And they did. They locked her up. They ended up putting her in a monastery or in a nunnery the rest of her life. Which is actually a pretty kind thing compared to what happened to other people that crossed Peter. Peter's going to extend Russia a long way. We call him the first enlightened despot. He studied philosophy, and he thought that your leaders should be men of thought and study. And that's a pretty big step forward. So while he could be this frat boy that did crazy things, he was also, he extended rights to the people of Russia. He broke down the idea of peasants and let people own land. He moved the capital city from Moscow to a place he named after himself, St. Petersburg, and built the greatest capital city in the world, built a modern navy. You could not have modern Russia without Peter, okay? Tomorrow, I hope that we get to talk about Catherine the Great. That's all we got today.